the Indigenous people from Colombia, went to New York, and they sent an invitation to the traditional Hopi to attend this gathering where they were going to be having a meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, I remember that.
So I was in, yes, and you helped to raise the funds for that to actually happen. And so we facilitated the funding to have three, and the picture's up right now, and that's a picture of the Hopi on the far left there. His name is Harold. And the Mamos and with the Dalai Lama. And it was a wonderful event where they didn't have a lot of time with the Dalai Lama, but certainly it made a very strong impact and a positive impact on other communities and other Indigenous people.
Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
So without further ado, I would like to share with you a little bit about my dear friend Miriam. And just on a personal note, I met Miriam, she was a guest on my show, back in 2010, 2011, I would say. We did appear, not at the same time, but we were both featured in Collective Evolution 3 by, of course, Joe Martino and that wonderful group over there, again, in Toronto, Canada. And she's been working with me. You know, we work on a lot of projects together, but she's also become a very dear friend of mine. Beside that, she is also the executive director and founder of the Great Gathering of Humanity, which is a United States-based nonprofit. She is a social entrepreneur and has dedicated her time, energy, and resources to encourage positive change and life balance around the world. Over the past decade, her primary advocacy has focused on the preservation of Indigenous traditions, natural resources and ecosystems, alternative energy research, ancient wisdom, sustainable living, spiritual enlightenment, and interconnected concepts. She works as a liaison and contact, working with a wide variety of traditional, Indigenous, and other communities throughout the world. She is an accomplished freelance writer, inspirational speaker, public relations agent, international fundraiser, and association management consultant. And I've been lucky to have her help me with a lot of things as well. So without further ado, let me welcome my very good friend Miriam Delicado to the Just Bernard Show. Hi, Miriam.
Hello, Bernard. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. It's great to be here. And thank you again just for giving us at the Great Gathering this opportunity to talk a little bit more in depth about what it is that we are doing and our history, so that people have more information about some of the projects that we've worked in the past and where our nonprofit is moving forward into the future. And this is a great platform to be able to do that on. So I just wanted to say thank you again. And also on a little side note, just to mention that it's kind of funny that you were talking about getting glasses and that you have to wear them full time. And just in the last few months, I'm in the same situation. I need to start.
Well, we're about the same age, if I remember correctly. So.
Absolutely.
Oh, my goodness. That's funny. So, Miriam, I don't know if you want to share, but can you share with us where you are right now? Are you in Canada? Do you want to share that with everybody, where you're going or whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, right now I've been blessed. I came to the United States for my birthday, which has just passed. I came to see a dear friend here in Bend, Oregon. And I've been really fortunate because they are going to be loaning me their truck and camper, and I'm going to be heading out to Arizona this week, in fact. And so I'll be doing a bit of traveling around in Nevada, Arizona, and possibly a little bit even into New Mexico in the next couple of months.
Your Southwest tour.
Absolutely. And with the camper on the back of the truck, it certainly opens up a lot of different opportunity to be able to visit with different people and actually take a really nice little vacation to some beautiful spots that are in the Four Corners area. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it sounds great. And, with that, I'll go ahead and start the discussion, is that you've always seemed from what I understand, you've always been drawn to that region of the United States. And I was wondering if you'd like to share with us a little bit about what attracted you to working with Indigenous cultures, and maybe you can tell us how that brought about the beginning of the Great Gathering.
Well, the Great Gathering has a very long history for me personally because for many years, ever since I was young, I really looked out into the world and thought, what can we do as individuals to support the world in making it a better place to live, not just for the time that we are here, but also into the future. So I've had this fascination with looking at what I call ecosystems of nature, and that means human nature and human ecosystems, mm-hmm. and being able to view something and understand that, and through that self-educating, I came to realize that what I saw happening in the world was that people were starting all of these beautiful nonprofits, and they had great organizations, and they had amazing causes that they worked for and worked with. But we needed to move towards more of an understanding that each community, for example, is an actual ecosystem itself. And they have factors that make them unique. And so about 10 years ago, I actually started to, 9 years ago now, I really started to bring this vision that I had of the Great Gathering to life by creating a website and starting to just put my ideas on paper and make them solid. And the Indigenous, we'll get into that because I think that's a whole nother topic about the Great Gathering, which has really become a very big part of our work. But it's this vision of understanding that we're all interconnected, and then if we look at each community as being that ecosystem, then it just becomes a bigger ecosystem for the country and then for the world, as an example. So we have to look at each area in the world that needs our attention for a transitional change, so that we can have a sustainable future for future generations. And in order for us to do that, we can't just pick one thing to try and sort of fix. We have to look across and say, what is the issue itself? What creates these problems? And then try and find solutions for them as a collective. Giving someone water in a country that has drought is not enough. We have to teach them at that point how to farm and how to save seeds, and then from there to educate. And it's a whole service that needs to be given to each individual ecosystem that we have. And so this is where the vision of the Great Gathering came from, in this interconnectedness. And my involvement with Indigenous people really came about very naturally, in my opinion, because I traveled in 2003 through the Southwest, and it was then that I met the Hopi people, and they really changed my life in many, many ways. And over the course of many years, opportunities would simply come to me in order to meet with different Indigenous people, and I followed that opportunity. And as a result of that, as I was building the Great Gathering, we had opportunity to do projects with different Indigenous groups. So that's how we sort of started. And since then, we've built, I think, a really wonderful small nonprofit that we would really like to continue to grow and be able to, as our resources come in and donations come in, which are tax deductible in the United States. We have a tax ID as a 501c3. And as finances come in, we can then serve more people. And that's what I'm really working hard to be able to achieve. Bernard?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. I was going to say, if you ask me, you've done quite a bit of work already. You've done many accomplishments. I'm very lucky enough to have you as my friend, and I get to hear a little bit of what happens while it happens. And, I mean, just some of the stories that you've shared with me, all the beautiful people that you have dealt with, that you've assisted through the Great Gathering over the years has been very inspiring for me as well in the work that I do. So keep up the good work, by all means. So you're doing a wonderful job. And with that being said, you said you first met the Hopi a few years ago. Actually, I believe I actually helped you with this a little bit. You helped them to put out their statement on the issue with the water in Hopi, and I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners remember that when Arizona, was it McCain that was trying to take the water?
Yes, and I just want to be very clear about this. I have, the Hopi people are very, they're very, very, very culturally strong.
Yes.
And, my relationship with them is on many different levels. And one of them is that I have a personal relationship with certain people out there. They're friends of mine. We have an opportunity to go and visit each other and chat and this type of thing. And then I have the work that we're doing with the Great Gathering. And then, so as a friend to the Hopi people, I have been involved in certain topics out there that to assist them in bringing bigger messages to the world. This has happened, for example, when they were coming to say that they were going to start to take the water that's underneath Hopi. And, of course, Bernard, you helped us at that time to kind of get the voice of the message of the people out, the Hopi people. And these are things that in my history with the Hopi that they have called me and asked me for assistance on. And I've gone there at different times and, just given a little bit of input as far as I think the way that the outside world may perceive something, or how best to send a message out into the world about difficult issues like that. But I would like to be very clear that part of the work that I've done with them has been on my own.
Okay.
Whereas the work that I've done, there's other work that I've done with the Great Gathering. And Bernard, I think that all of the main projects almost that I've worked on with the Hopi people, in some form or another, you've been involved in. And I would just want to say thank you for that.
Oh, it's definitely a pleasure and an honor, and I'd love to help any way I can, by all means. So, it's very interesting. I never knew there was I didn't know that that was separate from the Great Gathering. So, thank you for clarifying that and sharing that.
Well, the difference here is that, for example, the Great Gathering has been involved more on the cultural side of Hopi. For example, back in 2011, there was a gathering that took place out in New York between the Colombian Mamos, the Kogi and Arawako and Wiwa. The indigenous people from Colombia went to New York, and they sent an invitation to the traditional Hopi to attend this gathering where they were going to be having a meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, I remember that.
So I was in, yes, and you helped to raise the funds for that to actually happen. And so we facilitated the funding to have three, and the picture's up right now, and that's a picture of the Hopi on the far left there. His name is Harold. And the Mamos and with the Dalai Lama. And it was a wonderful event where they didn't have a lot of time with the Dalai Lama, but certainly it made a very strong impact and a positive impact on other communities and other indigenous people. Because they were talking, of course, about the protecting water as one of their primary focuses that came out of this meeting. And so other tribes and nations were inspired by this and uplifted. And we know this because we had a lot of feedback. And in the Toronto area, there's something very powerful about that area, spiritually.
There is.
But the Toronto area has the Anishinaabe, another indigenous group, and they started something called the Sacred Water Circle. And it actually came about as a result of this particular meeting with the Dalai Lama, the Mamos, and the Hopi. And also, there were members of the Dogon tribe that were present there as well. Mm-hmm. And so it was a really interesting time because, of course, for myself, it was almost at the beginning of the Great Gathering starting to really take form and take hold. And, you know, we really got serious as far as building the organization. And since then, again, I've traveled with a Hopi representative, a traditional Hopi representative, to Toronto to take part in the Sacred Water Circle, for example.
Oh, wonderful.
We have sponsored small projects with the Hopi, with buying them equipment, computers, laptops, that sort of thing, office equipment that they needed. Helped to facilitate some different travel for elders to be able to do certain work. We've sponsored in Colombia with the Mamos. We actually were able to facilitate a specific, and the picture that's up right now actually is me at the Sacred Water Circle, sitting beside the elders, and these women are remarkable. They're called the Water Walkers, and I strongly suggest that people take a look at the Sacred Water Circle from the Anishinaabe in Toronto, and please donate to their cause and their work directly to them, because what they're doing is really valuable. They do a lot of outreach, education, to be able to help people to understand the value of water, not only from a traditional view, but they have education programs in the universities there, and they talk to even the bankers and the politicians and the community leaders. So they've really done a lot of work there that I admire.
That's wonderful.
And up on the screen right now is a mamo who passed away last year. His name is Mamo Palia, and he was a very beautiful mamo. And again, we helped to facilitate this mamo and two of the sagas. That's what the women are called, sagas. We helped to participate and facilitate meetings between these mamos from Colombia directly into Hopi. And so they came out to Hopi, and I was able to facilitate as an intermediary to make that happen. And so I know that one of the things that people are very often very concerned about, and as they should be, is that I am speaking for Indigenous people or Indigenous groups, and that's simply not the case.
Right.
My work is very focused on, if I go into a community, to ask really very directly and very carefully, and this is key, what do they need in order to make to create their own sustainability? What do they need to correct something that's been set aside? And that's what my focus has been. So I've done some things with the Kogi, for example, and also with the Arahuaco in Colombia. And we bought, again, computer equipment to help facilitate their work.
Commercial time. Okay, Miriam, please hold that thought, and when we return, we're going to continue this discussion, and we'll talk more about the Great Gathering and your work with supporting Indigenous culture. We'll be right back.
You know, we facilitated small projects out there with them by buying, for example, a laptop and some other small equipment, video camera, so that they could then document for themselves, not with anyone from the outside, but to document for themselves some of the teachings that they wanted to be able to share with youth, let's say, that are not in the same region. You know, the one aspect of Indigenous culture that we have to be very, very cautious of is not to overstep our bounds as outsiders into their culture. So, you know, I have been asked, for example, by different people to support projects within Indigenous cultures, and from the perspective of how what we share could not necessarily harm, but change the culture,
right.
or shift the culture. You know, as the executive director and founder of the organization, I'm very, very aware of that and very cautious of that. So that's one of the things that we make our focus, is to be very mindful of those types of projects that we do with Indigenous, because they have their own way of, you know, their own way of teaching, their own, let's call them rules, steps by which they follow different protocols and things. And it's tough as an outsider to be able to fully understand all of those, because it changes from group to group.
Yeah.
So I, you know, as the director, I'm very aware of that and very cautious and very gentle with the work that we do. But we've done some great things, because one of the main focuses that we found our organization to have is cultural exchange projects, where we can facilitate different elders meeting with other elders, or maybe going to meet with youth in a different region to help share the culture and understanding. And this is a very important aspect of being able to understand that our differences is through the dialogue, and recognize that there's real value in understanding that perspective on water, on air, on their ancient teachings and how exactly that relates back to us in the world. For example, the Mamos, I've traveled a few times now on different journeys to Colombia and gone up into the mountains where they live. And the purpose of that is for, and those are sponsored Great Gathering projects, because we need to really understand what it is that they need and want in order to support them. And we have been asked to support them with funding for gatherings, for example, so that they themselves can have those gatherings, not for the outside, but to help them to maintain their Indigenous teachings and language and way of life. And we've also been asked on the last journey that I was there in 2014 to help facilitate funding for them to be able to purchase certain items that they literally can't find in their territory anymore because it's been strip mined out, example. And so things are very complicated and very often misunderstood when it comes to people that are just sort of looking from a distance towards cultures that are not their own. So I try to be very transparent on our website for the Great Gathering when we are involved in projects, to say who we're involved with, to say what the actual goal is, and this type of thing. We try to be as transparent as possible and also respectful as possible. So we have done some work with the Kogi, as I've said, New York with the Dalai Lama, facilitating elder-to-elder meetings that took place out in Hopi. We facilitated with equipment in Colombia, facilitated other small things while we were there, helping people to travel to different places and things like that. Nothing big, because we have not had the major funding.
Right. Well, they all sound big to me. I mean, seriously, you're creating bridges and avenues that may not have been available. For example, elders meeting other elders, I think, is absolutely wonderful. Miriam, I can't help but wonder, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering the same thing. The name, the Great Gathering. A lot of us, especially my listeners, we're all about light workers and the awakening and everyone coming together as one and whatnot. The Great Gathering is. What does that name mean? How did you come about it? Is it about bringing all of us together? Is it about sharing, having Indigenous cultures share with each other? I know, just looking from the outside and with the work that we've done together, that I've worked with you on, it's more. The Great Gathering is more for advocacy for Indigenous cultures, if that's an appropriate thing to say. But can you tell us about the name and the function of it, I guess?
The Great Gathering, when I've had this, this vision of what I wanted to create for the organization itself, the basis of it is about bringing people together from different cultures, religions, backgrounds, countries, and having them create dialogue. That is really the base of the Great Gathering, is about bringing people together to learn from each other, and then to take that education and apply it to their own lives to make a better future. Because as we grow as a global population, one of our greatest challenges is to overcome our differences and to understand our differences. And so it becomes increasingly more important to be able to understand our neighbor, whether that neighbor is Indigenous or that neighbor is, Muslim, or that neighbor is Christian, or that neighbor is an atheist, or the neighbor is a gardener, or the neighbor is a Silicon Valley tech person. we have these gaps in the way that our global ecosystem is interacting. And so the Great Gathering just seemed as though it was a logical name to see, bringing these different pieces together to be able to look at what the issues are and then start to confront them and find solutions and implement them. So we are involved in many different aspects of, projects and programs through our organization. But before I get to that, if I may, I just want to mention that we also are doing some work with the Khoisan in South Africa, and I personally have worked with them since 2009. We have a wonderful person that we work with there gentleman by the name of Stanley Peterson. He does many different things in South Africa for his people and with his people. And he also helped us to create a language, get in touch with a woman named Oma Katrina, who has a language school in South Africa, a very small language school. And she's trying to teach it to the children before it's lost. And it's one of the oldest languages on the planet. So we're involved with this type of programs in South Africa. And recently we sponsored Stanley Peterson to have the internet and also some equipment, computers, camera, this type of thing, in South Africa so that we can interact directly with him through Skype, for example. So you'll start to see the Great Gathering doing work of sharing interviews on our radio program with different people from the San or Bushmen. And we're going to talk about and start to form new projects for education, for example, for the Khoisan people. And really anyone in there, I'm not going to limit it to the Khoisan, but small education programs. And they're simple things that they need. They're very basic needs. How to get a job, how to apply for a job. Maybe they need a little resume and they don't even have the money to type it and to print it. We're gonna start very slow and start to integrate some of these little baby steps in order to move forward. So I've already been asked by a few of the people in the Khoisan community to help facilitate their need for equipment because they literally don't even have laptops to be able to do work there. So we want to be able to give them what they need to advocate for themselves, not for us to do it for them, but for them to do it for themselves. And then through that process, they become self-sufficient and self-sustaining. So, if anyone does want to donate, we definitely need the funding. If you're in the United States, we are a registered 501c3 with a tax ID. You can donate on Facebook. We're on Facebook. We are on Instagram. We are on YouTube, and we also have our website, thegreatgathering.org. And I hope that some of the listeners will actually start to support our organization so we can build on these projects. The other aspect of what we've done, for example, is we have right now a sacred site building project that we got some good funding into our nonprofit for last year. And we're very excited about that because, maintaining sacred sites is part of our really human history. And it is important for us to know where we're from in order to remember so that we can move forward with respect of what we're doing today. It's like a reminder. So we have a sacred building project that we've worked on as well. And we also want to start to facilitate some smaller projects like planting projects and people creating their own gardens and simple things that can lead to, quote, self-sustainability. And this is really the goal of the Great Gathering, is to be to really be open to listening to the needs of others, and then support what it is that they need in order to become self-sufficient and self-sustaining. So that's really the goal of the Great Gathering.
And, you know, it's a great goal. With that being said, I can't help but notice that when you're speaking of this, it's not like like the Great Gathering is approaching it to, how do I say it, westernize these indigenous cultures. It's not about teaching them to be Western. It's teaching them to become self-sustaining in their own traditional manner. And does that sound about right?
Absolutely, and I know that there are challenges in every community. There's great challenges in every community I think that we're all there. I don't think that it's just Indigenous communities that we are struggling to find our own little place within this ever-changing technological society. And it is really important in Indigenous culture because on a personal level, you know, I would love to be able to support them so much more because they have such beautiful teachings and traditions, and that's so valuable. But they've had a hard time in our history. They've really had a difficult time in trying to maintain that. So the newer generations are trying to revive what was taken from them, literally, in the past. And they're trying to do everything they can to revive that and to build what they have and to make it strong again, or to make it even stronger if they're already strong. And so the Great Gathering wants to support that. You know, for example, protecting sacred sites is really important for that reason. Sacred objects that sometimes are sold, for example, and they go on auction. We've had that with the Great the Hopi people approached us when some sacred items that they wanted back returned to them that they were saying in the public had been, you know, taken from them, and they wanted them returned, and the only way that they could get them back was to buy them. They did call the Great Gathering and say, do you think that you can find us funding? But we don't have millions of dollars to be able to facilitate that. But if we did, we would have participated in that process for them.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. That was, what, about last year or the year before?
Yes, they've had a few of them, actually. They've had a few of them, and these things are very much a concern to people. So right now, if I may, there's up on the screen, there's a picture of myself with Princess Karu Nakamaru of Japan, lovely lady.
Yes.
Dedicated her life to the peace movement ever since she was young. For example, her father was very much an advocate of peace and was very involved in world advocacy. She herself is a highly respected interviewer who has sat with some of the world leaders from, you know, during the 90s was the peak of her career. And she sat with presidents and prime ministers and royalty and some of the biggest stars on the planet and musicians. And she interviewed them. So she's quite a remarkable lady. And during this her whole life, for 50 years, she's been focused on peace. A couple of years ago, she received a peace prize that's given out to a handful of people from all over the world. And so she is, we have been talking for a few years now, and we look forward to the future with her, because as in a collaboration to work with her foundation and the Great Gathering in order to facilitate more projects and programs with people all over the world, not just in the United States. So we look forward to that. We're not sure when that's going to unfold, but when it does, there will be so much more opportunity for people to submit, for example, their own project. And you can do that now, actually, on the Great Gathering. There's a form there if you wanted to volunteer to participate in the Great Gathering and work with us on some of these projects and programs that I've just mentioned. And also to submit your own project ideas and see if the Great Gathering would be able to want to take that on as a project and try and find funding for you. We are a very small nonprofit, and we do struggle in the aspect of funding. So I'm hoping that, in time, as we build our relationships, which is what we've been primarily focusing on when we don't have the funding, that as we build the projects and just lay them out, that people will want to become more involved and donate. But the funding is definitely welcome now.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's another area that we're working on. And we do want to get involved with environmental projects, helping people to get solar energy, for example, assisting them to do planting projects, greenhouses, to build greenhouses. We have all sorts of little smaller projects behind the scenes that we've worked on for years, but it's just going to take funding in order to unfold those. And people are sort of waiting patiently for that funding to come in so that we can build the project and unfold them. And one of the things we want to try to do with some of them, it's a little bit difficult with all of the projects, but with some of them we want to try and document a little bit of the works and share that as well, because as the executive director and founder of the Great Gathering, my philosophy is to try to be as transparent as possible,
right,
with the public, because I think that assists in the educational process, and also with what it is that we are doing. There was a lady who made a comment on this thread and before the program, and said, "Who is this woman representing? I want to know the names of the people in Indigenous cultures." And I really appreciate that she actually made that comment. I think that it's very important to ask those questions, because there are a lot of people that say that they represent different communities and they don't. I don't represent any of them. I represent the Great Gathering, and the projects that we're trying to find funding for example, with the Mamos, we've talked about that with them years ago, but we have received no funding up to this point to go towards their particular project, which I think is, I believe that funding will come at the right time, and at that point we'll be able to communicate back to them and send it to them so that they can do the work that they've asked for. So I'm hoping that we will eventually be able to have some strength with a community effort, especially in the way of volunteers as well, which would be fantastic.
Yeah, speaking of which, Miriam, I can't help but think about your team. Tell us a little bit about your team. Tell us a little bit about your board of directors, your volunteers, how people can volunteer, how people can be selected to help with the board of directors.
Well, we have there's three of us on the board. Nina Dolwani, who is our secretary, and Michael McCombert, who is our president and treasurer. And the two of them came on board because, in my personal life, they were friends of mine, and we all have a similar philosophy as far as our view of the world, seeing that we can come together as a community to be able to create positive change. I would say that Nina is definitely a bit of an activist. She's very involved in different areas that really move her in her own community, which is fantastic. She has been a great support to the Great Gathering for many years now. And she's helped to sort of guide our public face as well. And her and I are both going to begin to do interviews for our upcoming podcast. So if anyone out there is listening and they are currently working on projects similar to what we've talked about or our philosophy at the Great Gathering, please let us know, because there's an area on the website at thegreatgathering.org where you can submit a suggestion for a radio program. And also for our team, I have personally had some health issues over the last couple of years. So right now we're actually looking for new volunteers to come on board to assist us in our radio program that we're going to be starting up, and also writers for our blog section, which we call the intentions area,
right,
to share uplifting, positive information that will inspire and motivate people to go out and get involved, whether it's with our organization or another. And we are looking for volunteers with in the areas of graphics and film editing, sound, people who can work with editing in different sound for either video or podcasts, this type of thing.
And Miriam,
So
we're out of time, but could you please tell people where to go to sign up for this? Is it thegreatgathering.org?
Yes, they can go to thegreatgathering.org. And I just would, and there's volunteer forms to fill in. There's suggestions for radios. There's current projects, past projects. You'll see it all on the website. And also, I'd just like to mention that the entire organization is a grassroots organization. We have. I personally work very, very hard in order to make all of these projects happen.
Yeah.
So I look forward to volunteers coming forward and getting involved. And thank you again for having me and having the Great Gathering. And it's really important that we all come together and make it happen. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Miriam. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I will see you here next week, same time. I love you. Have a wonderful week.